Now, another thing that is actually mentioned in the Society of Obstetricians and Gynecologists of Canada guidelines for nausea and vomiting in pregnancy is acupressure. You can actually purchase bracelets or armbands that specifically provide pressure to certain points, two spots on the wrist that can improve nausea and vomiting in pregnancy. And it is actually in the guideline. The really great thing about this option is that, of course, there's no medication, there's no risk to your pregnancy or risk to baby, and it won't be so sedating. It doesn't put you to sleep like diclexin often can. Welcome to my fertility podcast, Superhumans, the show that brings you expert insights, personal stories, and the latest in fertility care all in one place.
Whether you're starting your fertility journey, navigating challenges, or just exploring your options, we're here to empower you with knowledge, support, and hope.
Join us as we dive deep into topics that matter most, from IVF and fertility treatments to mental health and wellness.
I'm Dr. Mavis Garcia.
And I'm Dr. Wise. We're two of the fertility specialists at Markham Fertility Centre in Markham, Ontario, Canada. Think of us as your sisters in all things fertility. Let's demystify the world of fertility together. Welcome back, Superhumans, to my fertility podcast. I'm Dr. Wise.
And I'm Dr. Garcia. And today we're diving into super practical topics, questions that you have for us every day, such as what over-the-counter medications can I take? How do I handle these annoying early pregnancy symptoms, just as nausea, constipation, headaches, allergies, and even back pain?
Plus, we'll chat about exercise, cardio, weightlifting, and common and not so common worries like owning a cat and weight gain, protein intake, and of course, the guidelines for managing nausea and vomiting in pregnancy. So let's get started.
Let's start with nausea and vomiting in pregnancy. This is one of the most common concerns that we hear about. Did you know that 70% of expectant mothers experience nausea in early pregnancy? It is considered one of the earliest signs of pregnancy, and it can persist throughout the first trimester or even longer.
I'm actually surprised it's only 70%. Because I feel like, in talking with patients, it's almost like upwards like 80, 90%. But, I think for people who are not pregnant, when we think of nausea, we think of that sensation in the stomach that makes you feel queasy, that feels like you're going to be sick. But I think nausea in pregnancy can even present in slightly different ways. People may not necessarily say they feel nauseous, but along those same lines, they will often talk about food aversions, certain foods that they just cannot even think about. They can't smell it. They can't look at it. And also certain food avoidances or timing of eating that can affect that same sensation. So, that is all kind of falling under the umbrella of nausea, vomiting in early pregnancy, I think.
And it's also important to say that even though you're right, it's kind of like 80, 90%, some people really don't have any nausea in pregnancy, and that's perfectly fine. I personally was one of the lucky ones that I had zero nausea when I was pregnant for both pregnancies. And yeah, I was also thinking, oh my God, I should be having nausea. Does that mean something is wrong with me? But we know that not having nausea, it's not a sign that your pregnancy is not healthy, or even having nausea and then the nausea going away is not a sign that you have had a miscarriage.
What's really interesting is that even though this is so common and something that people who have been pregnant have been talking about, thinking about, dare I say, battling for, millions of years, the exact cause is not fully understood. But it's probably linked to that surge of the human chorionic gonadotropin, that HCG hormone, that pregnancy hormone. And so for many patients, the peak time for nausea in pregnancy, in the course of the pregnancy, will often correlate or will fall around the same time as when those pregnancy hormone levels peak as well. Other factors that can contribute to these sensations include rising estrogen levels, generally just more sensitive stomach, stress, and fatigue. Because when you are tired, everything feels worse and all symptoms just are worse.
Yeah, that's true. So exactly like Dr. Wise mentioned, the HCG level peaks around 4 to 8 weeks gestation. And that is exactly which most of the symptoms associated with nausea peaks as well. So the nausea can start to subside after about 13 to 14 weeks. However, every pregnancy is different. And for some unfortunate souls, and some of those souls have been my patients in the past, they can have nausea and vomiting for the entire pregnancy, unfortunately.
It's interesting because people will start to feel nauseous early in pregnancy, but may not be obvious to the outsider that they're pregnant, and they may not be ready to tell other people that they are pregnant. And so that's why, these management strategies are so key and ways to kind of figure out how to cope or how to kind of lessen the symptoms. So, first of all, before we get into anything super fancy, we need to talk about those simple kind of home remedies and lifestyle things that you can change when it comes to nausea in pregnancy. First of all, if there is something that makes you feel bad, avoid it. This may sound really simple, but if you cannot suddenly tolerate the smell or the thought of certain foods, it's okay. Give yourself permission to not eat those things, to keep them away, stay out of the kitchen. If somebody else really likes to eat them in your household, that's great for them. Feel free to avoid triggers. Give yourself permission to avoid those triggers. Certainly, I can imagine, some family meals or bigger family get togethers may be slightly more challenging, but this is where you have to work with your allies
Yes.
that may know about your situation. Maybe that's your partner, maybe that's somebody else to give you a good out for those scenarios.
The other thing is you might want to eat smaller, frequent meals throughout the day. So rather than having like a big breakfast, lunch, and dinner, just break it up into small meals, and that's going to distend the stomach less and potentially give you less nausea.
Another thing to consider is to keep snacks around everywhere. So, oftentimes the guidance is to consider something that's like really plain, probably that's like a carbohydrate, something like soda crackers, plain popcorn, anything that you still find somewhat appealing. So, you're going to have these snacks on your bedside table. You're going to have these snacks in your car, in your desk, in your purse at all times. And even before you really get up out of bed in the morning, you want to think about putting something in your stomach just to kind of help settle it, especially before you try and brush your teeth, because that is certainly one of the biggest triggers for making people feel unwell.
And it's also important to stay hydrated, but sometimes drinking plain water can actually make nausea worse. So if you cannot tolerate plain water, you should still stay hydrated with other things. For example, ginger can really work wonders for nausea in pregnancy. You can try ginger ale, ginger candies, ginger tea, put ginger in the water. Another thing that can be really helpful as well is lemons. And again, if plain water is not something that you can tolerate, you can put some lemon in your water to A, be able to drink the water and stay hydrated, and B, the taste and the smell of lemons can help with nausea as well. When I was a medical student, I went to Tanzania for an elective for a medical relief mission, and all the women there were always sucking on lemons for nausea. And I always remember that. That's how I learned about lemons and nausea. So it's a very common type of home remedy that can be really helpful.
Now, this isn't exactly a management strategy per se, but I think it's really important to say this. We have just talked about eating plain crackers and eating ginger candy and ginger ale. These are things that are maybe not characterized or often thought of as the most healthy of options. These are more processed foods. They might be more simple carbohydrates that we're talking about here. And let me say, it is okay. The first trimester, especially if you're having a lot of nausea, vomiting, it's survival mode, right? Do not stress out about trying to get the optimal nutrition and hitting your protein targets and getting your 5 to 10 servings of fruits and vegetables per day if you cannot stomach it. You really have to just basically think about how you're going to survive through that time for
Yeah,
many people
exactly.
and give yourself some grace, give yourself the permission to know that you are not eating like your normal self, and that there's 2 other trimesters in pregnancy where you can try and focus a little bit more on that good nutrition that many people talk about, and we have talked about as well in previous episodes. So it's okay to eat the ultra processed crackers. it is okay to drink the ginger ale, even if it is the one that has the sugar, because you are really just trying to survive and get through.
Survive. Exactly. Now, when it comes to vitamins, studies have shown that vitamin B6 can actually be incredibly effective in reducing nausea in pregnancy. A dose of 10 to 25 milligrams every 8 hours can significantly reduce your symptoms. When you add vitamin B6 and doxylamine, which is an ingredient found in sleeping tablets, it can actually increase effectiveness. Vitamin B6 and doxylamine is commonly known as a medication called diclectin, which in a big randomized double-blind study showed that there was significant improvement in both the symptoms of nausea and vomiting as well as quality of life of participants.
In that trial, 48.9% of participants chose to actually continue the medication after the study, compared to 33% in the placebo group. So this shows us that patients who have tried it found it, reasonable to take, found that it helped their symptoms, and they opted to continue to take it. So diclectin is a safe and a well-tolerated medication prescription option. But of course, if this is something that you're considering or something you're curious about, you should always consult your healthcare provider first.
Now, let's touch on some other alternative remedies and what the literature says about it. I mentioned ginger, for example. There was a systematic review in the Journals of Obstetrics and Gynecology that looked at ginger, lemon, chamomile, and spearmint. And they found that they're all effective in reducing nausea.
Now, another thing that is actually mentioned in the Society of Obstetricians and Gynecologists of Canada guidelines for nausea and vomiting in pregnancy is acupressure. You can actually purchase bracelets or armbands that specifically provide pressure to certain points, two spots on the wrist, that can improve nausea and vomiting in pregnancy. And it is actually in the guideline. The really great thing about this option is that, of course, there's no medication, there's no risk to your pregnancy or risk to baby, and it won't be so sedating. It doesn't put you to sleep like diclectin often can. So, again, that's another really great option to try. You can get those bracelets at any pharmacy. I have had a patient who swore by these acupressure bracelets, and she specifically found one that had little like electrical stimulators on those points where you could dial up the stimulation and dial down the stimulation. And she was pregnant with twins, and she absolutely swore by those bracelets.
That's very interesting. I have also heard about the acupressure bracelets and have patients that use them successfully as well. It's important to know that where nausea is terrible and uncomfortable, it usually is a sign that there is a pregnancy and it is a healthy pregnancy. Not having it doesn't mean that there is a problem, but having it doesn't mean that your baby is in any trouble at all. If you're unable to keep foods down because you're vomiting all the time, that is a very different condition from having nausea. You need to talk to your healthcare provider because there are other treatments that you might need, and the condition now is called hyperemesis gravidarum, which is something a little bit more serious that requires a different type of treatment.
Let us move on to another extremely common complaint that women will have in pregnancy, and really not just the first trimester, but sometimes through the whole pregnancy. And that is constipation. Nearly half of all pregnant women will experience it at some point in their pregnancy. And so, what is constipation really? I mean, I think we can all imagine the feeling. I think we all have an idea, but it occurs when bowel movements will become infrequent or when they become really difficult, where people may have abdominal discomfort, cramping, where they may have to be straining. These are all not normal, not healthy things, and they all kind of fall under the umbrella of constipation.
We can definitely blame progesterone for this one. Progesterone is the hormone that gets secreted during pregnancy. It's a very, very important hormone in pregnancy, but it can also cause a lot of problems. One of the things that it does is that it relaxes the intestinal muscles. Therefore, it slows down digestion. Also, many women are taking iron supplements in pregnancy because of iron deficiency. So, iron supplements can also cause constipation. So it's important to adjust your hydration and dietary fiber intake in order to counteract the effect of the progesterone and the iron and decrease the incidence of constipation in pregnancy.
So again, prevention and treatment really overlap here. And just to kind of reiterate, you really want to aim for a high fiber diet with 25 to 30 grams of fiber per day from things like fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and bran. Prunes and prune juice are also natural remedies with proven effectiveness. This kind of goes back to what I mentioned earlier about giving yourself permission to maybe not have the healthiest diet in the first trimester. Sometimes it's really hard to get in those 25 to 30 grams of fiber every day because you just can't tolerate things like fruits, vegetables, and that's okay. So, we're talking about an ideal scenario, ideal situation you're getting in that fiber. But again, if you can't, that's okay. There's other methods for managing constipation. The other thing I'd be mindful of is that in terms of the prunes and prune juice, I would just be careful to figure out how much added sugar those things may have, especially
Mhm.
things like juices. Because if you're somebody who is at higher risk of developing gestational diabetes, something to be mindful of as well. But, really lifestyle diet changes are an awesome option if you're dealing with constipation. But the reality is that very few pregnant patients can actually do these lifestyle changes within the other context of the first trimester. So if you're not hitting these targets, please do not stress.
Yeah, exactly. Everything that we're telling you here is sort of ideal situations, and maybe you don't have nausea, but you have constipation. So then you can, for example, drink lots of water because drinking water is not causing you nausea, but it's actually going to help your constipation. You could be the other way. You have a lot of nausea and no constipation, and then drinking lots of water might not really be applicable to you because you're nauseated all the time. So this advice, you don't have to do everything that we're talking about here, but just take what applies to you. And like Dr. White says, give yourself grace to do the best that you can. If you're having constipation and you're increasing your fiber intake, again, drinking lots of water can be really helpful as well. Physical activity like walking, swimming can also help stimulate the bowel movements.
If lifestyle changes aren't enough, there are over the counter remedies as well. I will say that for, I don't know, 70 to 80% of patients I'll see with constipation in pregnancy, lifestyle changes are not enough. So if you need to do more things, please don't feel like you've failed or that you're not doing good enough, because I'm sure that you are because you're trying your very best. There are over the counter remedies that we can consider as well. Things like taking in more psyllium husk that has a lot of fiber in it. So a common brand is Metamucil. There's also stool softeners that you can get over the counter, like docusate sodium. One common brand is Colace. And these are safe things to take in pregnancy. Now, again, you always want to consult your doctor before starting any new supplement or vitamin, because if you have any other medical conditions or other medical issues, then there may be some concerns.
Now, here's one thing that you should avoid if you're constipated in pregnancy, and that is laxative pills. They can actually cause uterine contractions or dehydration, which is the last thing that we want. Mineral oil is something else that has been used in constipation, but in pregnancy can actually interfere with nutrient absorption. So those are things to avoid if you're having constipation in pregnancy. Now, if the constipation is really severe and you're having abdominal pain, if you notice blood in the stools or mucus, that could be something else going on. Don't assume that because you're pregnant, you are expected to just have these things. So if it's continuing, if it's not responding to any of your lifestyle or fiber intake, and if you see something else, like I mentioned before, other symptoms, make sure that you reach out to your physician to discuss your concerns.
Yeah, my favorite suggestion that you can get over the counter for constipation is something like PEG or PEG Light, or otherwise known as Restore Relax. There's many different brands, but this is not a laxative medication. So it does not make your bowel move faster. What PEG does is that it helps draw fluid into the intestine to kind of help make the stool a little bit softer and kind of help with propulsion. And it works very, very well. And it's nice because it does not cause that kind of significant abdominal cramping like laxatives might. And it doesn't cause that kind of uterine irritability, uterine contractions, and doesn't give you that kind of rebound like diarrhea or urgency, which can sometimes happen with laxative pills. So certainly Restore Relax is my personal favorite suggestion when it comes to over-the-counter solutions for constipation and pregnancy.
All right. So stepping away from nausea and constipation, I feel like those two things cover about like 90% of patients. But there are other things as well that people come to us about in pregnancy with concerns. One of them is, for example, headaches. Definitely the hormonal changes in pregnancy, the fatigue, the dehydration, the stress can cause more headaches. So Tylenol is safe to take in pregnancy for any kind of pain reliever situation, whether it is headache or back pain. It is very safe to take as directed. I know patients want to avoid taking anything when they're pregnant. If you're having that kind of discomfort, it's okay to take. We would prefer that you avoid profane or non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. And many patients are taking aspirin in pregnancy because that has been indicated for placenta-related issues if you're a high-risk patient. But if you have not been instructed to take aspirin, we would say to avoid that as well, unless specifically talked about by your doctor. When it comes to headache, prevention is also important. So stay hydrated, eat the best that you can, and sleep. It's really, really key, especially in pregnancy, to avoid headaches. There are many patients that might have migraines prior to getting pregnant, and then migraines get worse in pregnancy. There are some prescription migraine medications that are safe in pregnancy. So, again, important to talk to your doctor and have a conversation about your migraine medications and an early pregnancy. Other than medications, you can try things like cold compressors or relaxation exercise for headaches as well.
Seasonal allergies are another big question that we get when it comes to pregnancy, especially around the spring and the fall when seasonal allergies are certainly at their worst. Fact is, seasonal allergies do not take a break during pregnancy, unfortunately. But antihistamines like loratadine, otherwise known as Claritin, and cetirizine are safe options to take in pregnancy. You can follow the instructions as listed on the bottle or on the container for that. If you're having a lot of nasal congestion, sometimes that can be related to seasonal allergies, and it can also, interestingly enough, be a symptom of pregnancy. The saltwater nasal sprays or the saltwater nasal rinses are very safe and can be effective, but you just have to do it multiple times per day. The big thing is you want to avoid taking decongestants. So the decongestant nasal sprays or the decongestant oral medications that are called things sometimes like pseudoephedrine. You want to avoid taking those because those are not considered safe in pregnancy, unless, of course, your doctor specifically tells you that you can take them.
So now back pain. Back pain is super common as your body adjusts to pregnancy. It's going to generally get worse in the second and third trimester because you're going to be carrying more weight. And it tends to be also more severe when it is the second or third or fourth pregnancy because those muscles and those ligaments have been stretched. And now you're adding a new pregnancy. So it's very, very common for people to experience more of that musculoskeletal pain in the second, third, or fourth pregnancy. Like I mentioned, you can take Tylenol, plain Tylenol if you need it. Also, things like getting a supportive pillow for sleeping. There is a pregnancy pillow. It's like a whole body pillow that you wrap around your body, and it's great. It was so great that my husband stole my pregnancy pillow, and I had to get a new one because he found it very comfortable, even though he was obviously not pregnant himself. I'm still bitter about that. Another thing that you can use is a belly band. I know a lot of my patients that have. What it does is actually supports the abdomen and it can decrease the pressure on the back as well. There is also a lot of questions about like, oh, can I get in the hot tub when I'm pregnant? Can I do a heating pad? And we don't recommend getting in a hot tub when you're pregnant. It can lower your blood pressure. You can faint. Also, excessive heat is not great for the baby. But you can use a warm compressor, nothing that is too hot. But if you are having a lot of pain, like one of those heating pads in the lower setting for about 20 to 30 minutes can be okay and provide some relief. And we say it again, exercises. Sometimes that's the last thing that you want to do when you have back pain. Believe it or not, even when you are in pain, doing things like stretching, prenatal yoga, swimming, they can strengthen your core and ease the pain of the pregnancy, which usually comes from just having to carry that weight on your back and your core muscles.
Now, along the lines of back pain, there are a lot of other aches and pains that can happen in pregnancy in many areas, not just the back. But certainly, another option to sort of help manage that is pelvic floor physiotherapy. And so, we spoke with Cornerstone Pelvic Physio on episode 45 of our podcast. And that is something that patients, especially in the second trimester and third trimester, may want to consider. And again, that pelvic floor does extend into the lower back. So sometimes that can also help with back pain.
So now let's switch gears and talk about weight gain in pregnancy. Another common question, and it could be a very sensitive topic. We're going to spend a little bit of time on this one because we want to make sure that we answer your question in detail. You need to gain weight when you're pregnant. Weight gain is essential for a healthy mom and a healthy baby. Now, how much weight should you gain? That is the question. And it really depends on your pre pregnancy weight, or in other words, your BMI or body mass index. And as you know, the BMI is a measure of your weight relative to your height. And as you also know, because we've talked about BMI and fertility, it is an imperfect measurement of your health. If you want to know more about BMI and fertility, make sure that you check out episode 26 on my fertility podcast.
Generally speaking, in terms of weight gain in pregnancy, here is kind of a quick guideline to give you a bit of an idea. And this is according to the Institute of Medicine. So, for somebody who is starting pregnancy that is underweight, meaning a BMI is under approximately 19, then the expectation is that that person will gain about 28 to 40 pounds in the pregnancy. In someone who has a quote unquote normal weight, or that BMI sort of sitting in and around the 19 to 25 range, we would recommend that that person aim for a weight gain of about 25 to 35 pounds. If someone is starting the pregnancy at an overweight BMI, meaning that that BMI is about 25 to 30, then the recommendation is a weight gain of about 15 to 25 pounds. If somebody is obese, meaning that their starting BMI pre-pregnancy is 30 or over, then the weight gain that's recommended in pregnancy is about 11 to 20 pounds. So as you can see, the weight gain that is recommended is relative to the starting BMI, and that when you are starting the pregnancy at a higher BMI, then a lower amount of weight gain is recommended.
Now, remember, these are just guidelines, and your obstetrician would be the best person to really counsel you as to exactly what is appropriate weight gain for your specific situation. We know that gaining the right amount of weight gain, that's not too much and not too little, can lower the risk of complications like gestational diabetes, preeclampsia, and the risk for cesarean section. Once again, we know that the number on the scale doesn't tell the whole story. So we're just giving you the guidelines here as to what you might hear from your obstetrician based on your starting BMI.
The other important point when we talk about weight gain in pregnancy is that it's not linear, meaning that it's not like, okay, if my doctor tells me I'm going to gain, 30 pounds in pregnancy, then if I take 9 months divided by 30 pounds, I should gain that many pounds per week. No, don't think of it that way, because it will vary a lot throughout the different stages of pregnancy. So, for instance, some patients in the first trimester of pregnancy, especially if they're really nauseous or having vomiting, might actually lose a couple of pounds. And that can be very normal. And that does not necessarily mean that you're going to have an unhealthy pregnancy or that there's something wrong. Certainly, that week to week weight gain, or sort of from that prenatal appointment to prenatal appointment, sometimes it can jump, sometimes it can stay flat. It is not linear, and that is absolutely okay.
Now, if you ever wonder where that weight goes, let me give you a quick breakdown. The baby is the obvious culprit of the weight gain. At term, it's about 7 to 8 pounds. But then there is still, you need to increase your breast size, especially if the breasts are engorged for breastfeeding. That's about 1 to 3 pounds there. The uterus becomes a lot bigger than a non pregnant uterus. So that adds an extra 2 to 3 pounds. The placenta weighs as well, another 2 pounds. Amniotic fluid can be another 2 to 3 pounds. Now you also need increased blood volume, increased fluid volume, And that is another 7 pounds right there. And then the fat stores, which are really important for energy reserve. So that can add another 6 to 8 pounds. And that adds to approximately 25 to 35 pounds of weight gain throughout the whole pregnancy in somebody who started with a normal BMI.
Along those lines, for this weight gain, the calorie needs will also increase throughout pregnancy as well. This is the number of calories that a person will need to consume to gain the appropriate amount of weight. In the first trimester, most women, most people who are pregnant, do not need any extra calories. So, again, even if you're not feeling very well, you don't have to worry about eating a lot more, eating extra, or that quote unquote eating for two that we sometimes hear. First trimester, you really do not need any extra calories. Now, by the second trimester, about an average 350 calories per day is needed. And by the third trimester, the expectation is that someone's going to be consuming about an extra 450 calories per day. Does that mean that you can have like the full sleeve of Oreos? Please do not do that, or please avoid that as much as you can. Really, these calories should ideally be coming from nutrient dense foods, the whole grains, lean proteins, fruits, veggies, and healthy fats. Because even though you're taking in these extra calories, we want to get good nutrients from them, nutrient dense foods, so that you're getting a lot of value from these calories that you're taking in.
Yeah, remember, it's not just about eating more, it's about eating smarter to nourish both your body and your baby. And at the same time, like we said earlier, surviving. You need to survive and take care of yourself. So if you need to sneak in some crackers and some cookies there for the nausea, that's okay. But in general, try to do your best to stick to the guidelines that we're talking about.
All right. So, along those same lines, we're going to talk about protein. And protein is probably like the sexiest nutrient out there right now.
Instagram would say so.
Oh my God, everyone and everything. It's protein, protein, protein. Like you go to the grocery store nowadays and everything is like, this has this much protein. It is getting everywhere. It's a
Yeah,
lot.
yeah. Protein really got really good PR. I don't know what kind of
Yeah.
PR company the Protein hired, but they're doing a good job.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, listen, we joke, but protein for sure is one of the most critical nutrients during pregnancy. It's super trendy right now, but it is actually really important. It has been important for a really, really long time because it's essential for fetal growth and development, that, maternal tissue growth, and even the growth of the placenta to ensure proper nutrient transfer to your baby.
So while whole foods should be your first choice, and I cannot emphasize that enough, protein power do exist and they can be a convenient way to meet these needs, especially for people who just don't eat meat or have food aversion and are having a lot of difficulty getting some protein in. In terms of protein powers, there is whey protein, which is a byproduct of cheese production. It's very rich in essential amino acids and highly digestible. Of course, it is a dairy product. So if you have a lactose intolerance, that might not be a good option for you. There is also casein protein, which is also derived from milk. And you can do plant based proteins. They usually come from peas, rice, hemp, or soy. And these are excellent sources for people who are vegetarian or vegan or those who have a dairy intolerance. And then there is collagen protein, which is not a complete protein, but it provides only a specific amino acid in the form of glycine, which is really good for connective tissue.
But of course, not all protein powders are created equal. And here are some general safety tips to keep in mind. So, first of all, have a read at the ingredient list. So, many protein powders will contain artificial sweeteners as a way to keep calories down. As we've mentioned in a previous episode, many sweeteners are considered safe in pregnancy in moderate amounts, except for saccharin, which is often sold under the brand name of Sweet and Low. The other thing is that some protein powders may have a bit of caffeine in them. Not all of them, but some of them do. So just make sure that you're being mindful of that and including that in your total caffeine consumption a day, which we want to limit to about 2 to 300 milligrams per day. Some protein powders may also contain other kinds of herbs or ingredients like ashwagandha or ginseng. These are not as well studied in pregnancy and they may not be safe. So always just be mindful to check labels so that you know exactly what you're getting. In an ideal world, you want to look for a protein powder that has a third-party certification, as third-party testing done on it to make sure that it's safe and it doesn't contain any other harmful ingredients.
The best source of protein comes from whole foods. For example, lean meats like chicken and turkey, fish if it's low in mercury, like salmon or trout, eggs if you can eat dairy products, and as well as Greek yogurt. That's my favorite source of protein. Greek yogurt as well as cottage cheese. Now, there are some beans like lentils and chickpeas that also have proteins. And of course, there is nuts, tofu, and tempeh that are also excellent choices.
And remember, protein, it's not just about quantity, right? It's also about quality. So you want to aim for getting your protein from a variety of different sources in your diet. So you're getting all the essential amino acids and maybe some other nutrients. Like, for instance, those legumes have a lot of fiber too, which can help with constipation, right?
Yeah. And one good thing about protein being so popular is that people can find lots of recipes that have tons of protein in them because they're all out there everywhere.
Oh my goodness. I've got my husband hooked on these protein cookies. As soon as I realized you could bake with protein powder, it opened up a whole new world for me.
Yeah. For me, it's really the Greek yogurt, like low fat Greek yogurt. There is 30 grams of protein in like 175 grams of Greek yogurt. And that's my go to every
Mhm.
day. I love it.
I do a batch of the protein cookies every week, and my husband will take one for his breakfast because he likes sweet baked goods in the morning. So that works for him.
Mhm. Well, yesterday I made a big protein pancake, just like in a big sheet. And then I cut it up and put it in the freezer. So I'll be eating protein pancakes every morning this week
Oh, that sounds
because
good.
it is a very busy week, as you know, at the clinic, lots of early retrievals.
Yeah. Greek yogurt, frozen berries with some all bran has been my go to breakfast.
Forever since I've known you.
Yes, it has been my go to breakfast, like when I'm working, Monday to Friday since, oh my God, at least a decade now.
Since the beginning of time. Pretty much since I've known you, every time I come to your office in the morning to vent, you are eating exactly that.
Oh, yeah. In residency, that's what I was eating because I was just trying to get, you know how residency is. I was just trying to get enough food in my face in the morning. I could make it through whatever that day would hold for me, which was usually chaos in residency.
Now let's talk about exercise during pregnancy. Exercise during pregnancy can really be a game changer, and people tend to be quite afraid to do it, rightly so, especially our patients. They have struggled for a long time to conceive. And it can feel tempting to just like sit there and not even breathe to make sure that this pregnancy goes to term and nothing bad happens. But exercise can actually help with pregnancy outcomes. Even just 20 to 30 minutes of moderate physical activity can make a big difference in terms of nausea, back pain, pregnancy discomfort, how you go through the labor process, and overall the health of mom and baby.
And let's not forget the long term benefits of exercise in general, right? Staying active will help promote muscle tone, strength, endurance. In fact, I remember, and I actually don't know if this is true. I should probably be fact checking this, but somebody once told me that the physiology or what happens with a vaginal delivery, it's almost that physical effort is analogous to running a marathon. And I feel like for anyone out there listening who has had a vaginal delivery, they're probably nodding their head and agreeing with me.
Yeah, I'm definitely not in my head.
But when you think of it that way, the delivery, the labor, it's almost like you're training for something.
Yeah,
You're training for this
exactly.
big physical effort. And I think that's how you have to kind of frame it, that
Yeah.
your body is going to go through this big, crazy thing where your heart rate's going to be up. We're going to be relying on your muscles, your endurance. I always tell patients, you're training for delivery now. This is like the race that you're going to run, right?
Yeah, I love it. And I wish I had heard that advice when I was pregnant because I was one of those really scary cat people. Even though I knew better after having gone through fertility, I just didn't want to move and I regret it. So do what I say and not what I do. You can do better because now you have my fertility podcast and Dr. Weiss telling you that you're training for a marathon.
Mhm. Now, the big thing with exercise in pregnancy is, of course, it depends on your specific situation. You want to make sure that if there is a high risk pregnancy for many different reasons and you've been advised not to exercise, then don't do it. Don't listen to us. But if you've been told that exercise is safe for you at your particular stage in pregnancy, then you want to just sort of think about what those activities are. Not all exercises are going to be safe in pregnancy. Not all physical activities are going to be safe in pregnancy. The big thing is that you want to do things that have a low risk of you falling. Running outside in January when it's really icy, probably not a great idea. Running inside on a treadmill, for instance, might be okay. You want to avoid things where there's also risk of abdominal trauma. So, like contact sports, right? Like you're not going to be playing tackle football in pregnancy.
Or boxing or skiing or horseback riding. Those are all things that increase the risk of falling and having an injury. You also don't want to exercise to the point of exhaustion. So you want to listen to your body, even though it is kind of like training for a marathon. This is not the time that you actually want to train for a real marathon and increase your exercise tolerance overnight, because there's a lot of physiological changes happening in pregnancy as well. So I think it's still important to listen to your body and continue to do a physical activity that you're comfortable with, not necessarily the time to break a new personal best record.
Here are a few key guidelines when you're thinking about physical activity or exercise in pregnancy, or even outside of pregnancy, really. I mean, you want to make sure that you're wearing comfortable, supportive footwear, of course. Your feet might get swollen in pregnancy, your feet shape might change as well. So you might have to change that up. You want to make sure that you're staying hydrated. Drink plenty of water before, during, and after exercise. And you want to avoid exercising in hot or humid conditions. Pregnancy is not the time to be doing hot yoga because you're going to be feeling way more dizzy. Your blood pressure is much more likely to drop. You're much more likely to pass out. And there may be some risk to being in high heat for the pregnancy itself. So this is definitely the time for being in air conditioning, especially if it's the middle of summer. You want to skip exercise that involve lying flat on your back after the first trimester, as this can reduce blood flow to the uterus as well. You also want to include some stretching and mobility exercises as well as part of your routine. Now, the types of exercise that you do might be a little bit different. Your mobility exercise might be a little bit different. And so this is where reaching out to a professional may be really helpful, like a personal trainer or a physiotherapist, to talk about pregnancy-specific modifications for whatever activity you prefer doing.
Now, remember that exercise isn't just safe in pregnancy, it's actually recommended provided that you don't have any contraindications. So make sure you talk to your doctor about it before you start an exercise program. But really look into being active. I know Peloton has a prenatal series, and there are prenatal classes that could be in the community center where you live at or your gym. If you're unsure about how to balance your diet and exercise, you can consult a dietitian as well. And we have some links on the Market Fertility website. The bottom line is, don't feel like you cannot exercise because you're pregnant. Also, don't feel that you have to over exercise because you're pregnant. It's all about balance and having an approach, and ideally, even talking to somebody who is an expert about it. And like I said about everything when it comes to lifestyle, it's 80-20. You don't have to be perfect and do it all the time, 100%. But even if you can get it right 80% of the times, you're doing yourself and your baby a big favor.
We have covered a lot today.
I know.
I know, right? When it comes to pregnancy and some of the really common questions that people ask us. Now, there's just one more topic that we're going to tackle today, and it might seem a little out of left field.
Yes.
I
really struggle with where to put it, but it comes up a lot, so I wanted to cover it.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's super important. I think once we explain it, it'll make more sense in terms of why we're talking about it. For those of you who know me well personally, know that I am not a cat person. And for the record,
You're also not a dog person, so be honest.
That's true. I'm not a pet person either, because I think there's some people out here who also would argue that I'm not a fish person.
Okay.
But really, like, the cats in pregnancies, people who have cats in pregnancy, having a cat when somebody is pregnant, this is really worth talking about. So we're not picking on cats, but there is something specific about cats here, right? So a patient is pregnant and they have a cat. Do they need to get rid of it, Dr. Garcia?
Well, I'm also not a cat person, but I am definitely a dog person. But I would say that no, if you love your cat and you love your pet and you're pregnant, you absolutely do not need to get rid of your cat. The concern here comes from toxoplasmosis. Toxoplasmosis is a parasitic infection that can be transmitted through your cat feces. If you do not have the antibodies for toxoplasmosis, means that you have not been exposed, and then you are susceptible to being infected by this condition, which can have negative implications for pregnancy. However, even if you're not immune and you have a cat, it does not mean that you have to get rid of it. You just have to be mindful of it and maybe adjust the way that you interact with your cat, and particularly with your cat litter. For example, make sure that you always wear disposable gloves and wash your hands with soap and water after you use the cat litter. Make sure the litter box is changed daily, as the toxoplasmosis parasite doesn't become infectious until about 1 or 5 days after it has been shed. Another thing is make sure that you feed your cat commercial or dry canned foods, nothing that is raw or undercooked, because that is how your cat can get toxoplasmosis as well. Ideally, your cat should be indoor and your sandboxes should be covered so that you don't get a stray cat going into your sandboxes, depositing feces contaminated with toxoplasmosis. And always wear gloves when you're gardening for the same reasons. And of course, as it has been drilled into us during COVID times, really important to wash your hands always prior to eating. With all of these precautions in mind, then you can very safely continue to keep your cat friend and your pet, even if you're pregnant and even if you are not immune to toxoplasmosis.
Now, we've talked a lot about the cats and the risk of toxoplasmosis. And some of you may be wondering exactly what that is and what the risk is. And to be honest, it's actually a very complicated answer. It can depend on when you get toxoplasmosis in terms of how far pregnant you are and how far along you are. And so that's a whole separate other conversation. But it's worth mentioning that toxoplasmosis infections and the risk to pregnancy, although it can be severe, it's actually very, very rare that there is something or that something really bad happens.
Oh my goodness, we have covered so much in this episode. It's the questions that we get asked every single time. So I hope that this episode is super helpful. And I'm certainly going to be referencing this episode multiple times a day as I talk to my patients about their common questions and symptoms in early pregnancy.
It's so normal for pregnancy to come with so many questions. I mean, for people who are pregnant for the very first time, or even when somebody has had previous pregnancies in the past, every pregnancy can be so different in terms of the symptoms you're experiencing, the feelings you're experiencing. It's normal to have all of those questions, and we are here to help you navigate them safely and confidently along with your healthcare provider.
Remember, these are all guidelines. This is not advice that's going to apply in every situation. This is general education. So when in doubt, please talk to your doctor about your specific situation. And make sure to check out episode 55. I'm pregnant, now what? Part 1, initial testing, vitamins, and diet.
And that's a wrap for today, Superhumans.
If you're looking to connect, get social with us. Follow us on YouTube and Instagram at My Fertility Podcast, or visit us online at myconfertility.com. And don't forget, follow, subscribe, and share your favorite episode.
Thanks for listening to My Fertility Podcast and for being a vital part of our community. We know you've got this.
We're signing off until next Tuesday.
If you found this episode of My Fertility Podcast helpful, please take a moment to head over to the review section and leave us your thoughts. Your reviews and comments are incredibly valuable to us and help guide future episodes. We also welcome you to direct your questions to info@myfertilitypodcast.com.
My Fertility Podcast is produced by Rabbit Media Inc. in conjunction with Dr. Garcia and Dr. Weiss.
Music by Mixkit. Life is a Dream by Michael Ramirez C.
My Fertility Podcast is not intended to replace any type or variation thereof professional medical, health, or legal advice. nor should the content be taken as medical advice. Please contact your primary healthcare professional regarding any medical questions you may have. The information presented in this podcast is based on the knowledge and understanding of the host at the time of recording. Medical knowledge is constantly evolving, and new research may change the understanding of health-related topics. While we strive to provide accurate and up-to-date information, we do not guarantee the completeness, accuracy, or timeliness of the content. The views expressed in this podcast by guests are not those of the host or the management. This podcast is not intended to impose any type of discrimination. My Fertility Podcast and its management are not responsible for any losses, damages, or liabilities that may arise from the use of this podcast.